I cannot even tell you how baffled I am that I have a 17-year-old who's about to graduate from high school. He was born like yesterday. But seriously, standing on the tail end of this, in 5 years, I'm only going to have 2 kids at home out of 5. 5 years ago, it was like nothing. While people have told me that my whole life, I don't think that I fully absorbed it until pretty recently. Within that, the lesson is like, my gosh, don't screw around.
Welcome to Startup Dad, the podcast where we dive deep into the lives of dads who are also leaders in the world of startups and business. I'm your host, Adam Fishman. Today, I'm joined by Jesse Randall, the founder and CEO of Sweater, which makes venture investing accessible to everyone with a smartphone. He's a husband and father of 5 kids, ages 7 to 17. Jesse shared his perspective on how to be an authoritative father while still being caring and empathetic, why solely prioritizing career over family is a miserable path, why it's important for parents to each find something outside of work and family that they're passionate about, and his no-hint dropping framework in communicating with your spouse. Also, the way he's been able to leverage AI to turbocharge his kids' education. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to Startup Dad on YouTube or Spotify so you never miss an episode. You'll find it everywhere you get your podcasts. I hope you enjoy today's conversation with Jesse Randall. Jesse Randall, thank you for joining me today on Startup Dad. It's really great to have you here.
Yeah, hey, it's my pleasure. You know, anything to advance the conversation of dads running startups.
I love it. So you have clearly thought a lot about what family means and what your role as a father and a husband should be in your family. And I suspect that there's probably at least one, maybe more stories that have kind of shaped those beliefs. But before we get into that, I want to just jump right out and ask, so 6 months ago, you moved your whole family, which is your wife, 5 kids from like 7 to 17, 2 dogs, and a cat. That's like a zoo, to Puerto Rico from, I think, Utah or Colorado or somewhere around there. So you moved 6 months ago. Why? What was the genesis for that move?
Well, it was definitely a circus on the flight over, for sure. We had a lot going on. I remember the first airplane we got on, the stewardess was like, wait a minute, those are all yours? And you've got 3 animals? Like, my gosh. So yeah, it was a bit of a lift to get over there. But yeah, the genesis really came down to a business decision, and to not get too deep into that. Puerto Rico has some incentives to build businesses on the island. And so we qualified for that and decided to take advantage of it. So they require a resident to be there, and looked around the company and said, you know what, I think that this would be a good thing for our family. We pulled everything together and made it happen. So we'll probably be there for a couple of years, and then, we'll make some decisions after that.
Has it been hard for your 5 kids to make that adjustment? I think about you have multiple teenagers. Teenagers get pretty like entrenched in their friend groups and like their way of living, not known as the most flexible human beings on the planet. But like, has that been challenging with your kids? And how did you kind of bring that to them? Or was it not even a discussion and you were just like, we're doing this, everybody get excited?
Well, I mean, there's a little bit of the latter, right? It's like, well, we need to do this. So like, how do we do it? It became more of the question. The kids have done really great. So we have one senior in high school, and he was basically graduated. He just had a couple of credits left to do and was doing most of the concurrent enrollment, and he was able to extend that. So we actually approached him first because he was the one that we were kind of like, we don't know which way he's going to go. And so instead of surprising him with everybody else, we pulled him aside the day before and had more of an adult level conversation. Just said, hey, this is what's going on in our life. This is what it means. This is why we need to do it. This is how deep we are into it. We're not backing out, right? So how do we have this conversation? Chew on it. What questions do you have? Approach that first. And he came back with some good questions. He was very mature about it. Turns out he was really concerned about not being able to take his concurrent enrollment. And when I said he could still do it, he was like, oh, cool, I'm in. Yeah, whatever. Let's go. And then we announced it to the rest of the family together as a group. And it was mostly received with excitement. Like, we're going to go live on an island. And our 15-year-old daughter, she's more of the social one. She went through phases where she was like, oh, how awesome. We get to live like close to the beach and we're going to do all these things. And then she would recognize the things that she wasn't going to have. And she kind of gets sad and, oh my gosh, what about this? And, so we've gone through a bunch of those cycles, but 6 months later, We're doing all homeschool programs and stuff there in a variety of different contexts. And we're finding new friend groups, and we're integrated in with some church groups and some other stuff that is coming along smoothly. And, you're never all the way out of the woods for sure, but 6 months in, it's looking pretty good for now. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. And I think one of the things you told me that probably makes this helpful, or you able to kind of thrive in this move, is that if you prioritize purely career over family, that's basically a surefire way to be miserable, and it leads to bad outcomes for everyone. And so, like, how have you managed to balance those priorities when you're like, hey, professionally, we need to do this thing, but also, how do I make sure my family is cared for in this moment?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'd say this, like I'm a big family guy, obviously, and I'm willing to sacrifice, whatever my career might have been in order to prioritize my family. And that's not the case for everybody. No judgment on anyone that puts career above everything else, and that, kids are kids and they'll be fine. Like, there's a lot of different ways to approach it. I think my description is more like, I think that you lose some optimization on the family route. If you are truly just career above all else, it's very difficult to maximize what you can benefit from in a family, in my opinion. And a lot of that comes down to long-term happiness. There's studies now that show this pretty clearly, that the level of happiness that you have in that last third of your life is almost entirely tied to the number and depth of close relationships that you have, most of which are your immediate family. And nothing else makes up for it. Doesn't matter how much money you have or the status that you have in a career perspective. Those things don't bring long-term happiness. So to me, I concluded that's a means to an end. That happiness is kind of fleeting. And the deep happiness comes from your close relationships, which starts with your children, in my opinion. And maybe that's why I have 5 kids too, right? Try to maximize the size of that circle, and, have some nice procreation, have a big family group, and helps lead towards that. That's kind of like my approach on that, why I believe that. Now, the way that you balance it is that I also don't believe that you should just hole up and like not pursue a career and, only work 5 hours a day so that you can maximize time with your kids and live like a pauper. I don't think that you should do that either. That's also not responsible as an adult. There's lots of requirements to having a family, a lot of which are financial. And, so maximizing what you can provide to your family is also important, and it is a balance. And that approach into how far do you take that? Obviously, it's totally on the individual level, but I do believe that you should take some risks. You should be aggressive and try to maximize where you get in your career, while also not just throwing your family in the back of the station wagon and not talking to them for 5 years. Again, like, there's all kinds of ways that you can do this, and the way that you have your relationship with your spouse, and how you're taking care of your children's needs, and the role that you each play at different levels and at different time periods or stages of your kids' development. I mean, there's so many ways to approach it, but I definitely think that you should be aggressive in your career and try to maximize it, while also providing firm boundaries and saying the things that you aren't going to do, or like the periods of your life that you are going to sacrifice a lot, knowing that you are committing to coming out of it, whether that's going through graduate school or something that's really, really intense, or the first few years of your career or whatever. But it's so individual. It's like, there's no way to throw a blanket on all of it, right?
And I think that's one of the things that I like to get out of these conversations with this show is, like, there can be a broad range of perspectives on this, and it works differently for everybody. And I think it's just important for people to hear that there are different ways of prioritizing and living your life and things like that, which is why I was excited to talk to you. I want to stay on this topic because I'm wondering, so you've been at this dad thing for 17 years, and you've been at the career thing for longer than 17 years, I would imagine. And I'm curious if there was like a moment where you kind of came to that realization around, like, it's important to prioritize appropriately. Like, if there was something in time that really crystallized this for you. Like, I do know your family went through a bit of a health scare a few years ago. Like, has this always been how you were wired? Have there been moments that kind of have pushed you a little bit more in this direction, or to reset and say, like, oh, I got to lean in a bit more with the family?
I think a lot of it's kind of built into my DNA, a lot of the way that I was raised, and some of the ways that I experienced my childhood with my parents definitely feeds into that. My faith definitely feeds into the notion of how I perceive my relationship with my family. and sort of the broader view of why that's a priority for me. And then of course, like you did mention, I'm sure we'll get into it. Like we had a moment there where it was like, there's some scary stuff that really brings you back to reality and grounds you and saying like, when you have to face what a reality with a huge family change might look like for you. And then you look back and you're like, if that were the outcome, would I be satisfied with the way that we did things up until that moment? Having it pass and not having to endure a really difficult situation like so many people do, and then having your family still intact, it's like, okay, there's definitely something more important than whatever, might have been my priorities before that. So there's a lot of things that play into it. But I would say that my faith is definitely front and center, which plays into the way my childhood, the way I was raised. I grew up in Idaho. I say outside of Jackson Hole because nobody knows where anything is in Idaho. But I grew up like looking at the Tetons out my kitchen window every day. Like I grew up on a 100-acre farm. We had a couple hundred head of cattle. I'm the ninth of 10 children. My 5 kids isn't that big of a deal to me, even though that's insane to most people. And my dad was a farmer and a social worker. He worked 40, 50 hours a week on social work, 9 months a year. And then in the evenings and weekends and summers, we ran this farm. We ran cattle. My dad and my mom was full-time with all the kids, and arguably she worked way harder than my dad did. But my dad was, in a very intense position. And he also had a lot of leadership responsibilities in our faith circles as well that required a lot of time from him. And so I didn't spend a lot of one-on-one time with my dad, but yet I had this very positive impression of what it meant to be a father and to provide and to sacrifice what you might want as a father in order to provide opportunity and guidance and direction. And let's say a level up from where you have it as a dad to give your kids something better than you had. Both my parents really, they kind of broke out of the generational trap, maybe is a good word, of just like, I had the same thing that my parents had and they had the same thing that their parents had, and kind of going back generations. I mean, my ancestors came to the US in the late 1800s as immigrants and wanted to, and establish themselves in a rural area through homesteading effectively. And they handed that farm from generation to generation. And my dad was the first one to go to college. There's lots of things he learned along the way, which is basically he didn't make a lot of wise choices in the way that he set himself up to provide for his family. And by the time he figured it out, he was way too deep and he couldn't change. And so he looked at us and said, I know how to do it right. And so I am going to teach you how to do it right. And so he set us up well for that and gave us a good example. And we saw that. I mean, like I grew up relatively poor. We didn't have much, but now today, like I've got 3 brothers that are doctors and one that's a patent attorney. And my sister's married veterinarians and partners at PwC, and they're doing awesome things. And I accredit that to my parents. And a lot of that is based in the faith that we have, that we share as a family, that also provides a bigger perspective for why my dad was willing to do that in the first place. There's lots of rabbit holes you could go down there, but it's like for everybody, it's complicated, right? Family and motivation is a complicated thing.
Yeah. And so are you thinking about, like you said, your dad lived his life in a certain way. It sounds like he lived well, but realized too late that he'd not done some things that he wanted to do or not structured life exactly in the way he wanted to. So then he made sure that you all could kind of put your foot one level up the rung and sort of start off slightly at a slightly different path. Are you doing the same thing with your kids? Like, how do you talk to them about that history and making sure that maybe they're just a little bit of a head start from where you were even?
I find it to be a very complicated thing to try to set expectations for what a good path is for a life and a career, specifically on the career path for my kids, because the world is so different than when I started school, 25 years ago or whatever, and came out of high school. My dad kind of had it down to sort of like a formula. You do these things, you set yourself up like this. It's okay to take student loans under these circumstances, and you're going to set yourself up to have a great life, right? And today I look at it and it's like, whoa, man, like the world is a very different place. And especially the last few years with AI, rearing its head the way that it is. Seriously, 5 years ago, I would tell my oldest, like, he loves computers, he loves software, he loves all those things. I was like, that's a great career path. You're going to go and crush it, right? Let's set you up. And the last couple of years, I'm like, buddy, we need to have a conversation. Like the world is changing very fast. I value education. I have more degrees than I want to talk about. But at the same time, like the world is shifting very quickly to a skills-based output. And education and credentials don't mean what they used to unless you're going to be a doctor or attorney or something where you have to be licensed. And so it's like, I'm actually struggling a lot with that as a father, trying to be like, what is the best path I put my kids down? And I'm doing some experimentation right now, like some of the homeschool stuff we're doing. I actually designed an entire curriculum for my two middle kids that are freshmen and a sophomore in high school that's 100% built on engaging in AI for education. We're not doing a third-party system that has pre-made videos that they watch and take little mini quizzes and stuff. We developed a whole curriculum, and I've taught them how to build prompts and how to have the AI basically teach them and how to think critically and how to engage in that and identify what is truth and error and how to get second opinions and how to push the AI for various points of view. Because I believe that that's the future. Like, we have all of human knowledge at our fingertips, and that is going to be the skill set that takes you forward. It's the ability to adapt in a situation and become more valuable than your peers because of how you can self-teach and adapt and leverage tools that are smarter than you, right? Because 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, it was about what you had in your head that would set you apart from everybody else. And today, that's just not an advantage. You can't possibly hold enough information in your head to do all the things that AI can do. I believe that education's got to be flipped on its own head in order for us to take our children and level them up, right? So I don't know. Again, it's a complicated thing. I wish I had a formula like my dad had that he gave to us, but man, the water's murky. It's really murky.
Yeah. I want to come back to that a little bit later. I want to circle back to this idea of education and leaning into AI. Before we do that, one of the things that you told me in our prep for this show is that you have this belief that fathers have, over the last few decades, kind of become weaker in their roles in the family and maybe taken a little bit of a back seat from where they used to be. And so I'm just curious, like, what you meant by that and like how you see that influencing how you like to live your life.
Yeah, and I appreciate you asking the question, being willing to talk about it, because I think there's, probably a bit of friction on this particular topic in society today. And I think that there has been a shift in the mentality of the expectations for what a father ought to be and what it means to be a good father. And some of that does come down to the notion of what masculinity means and what is good masculinity versus bad masculinity. And there's definitely lots of levels of very bad masculinity out there. But I'm also a huge believer that there is a very long list of very good masculine traits that I think, unfortunately, have sometimes been pulled over or maybe even accidentally lumped in with what bad masculinity is, when I don't believe that that's the case. And so being a strong father figure and leveraging your ability to lead your family yoked very closely with your partner, whoever they are, and however that relationship is, you can have a co-relationship with your wife that is very much on equal ground while still being a very strong father figure for your children and for your community, and others that you engage in. And so sometimes I do think that fatherhood is underappreciated by society today and what it means and the impact that it has on your children to have a strong father figure. And I think that men need to maybe revive that a little bit and understand what it means to have a healthy balance with your spouse, to be able to lead your family, to be able to provide in a career standpoint, while also giving your children some of those good masculine traits that they need to see in a father, whether they're a young man or a young woman. Being able to have that type of healthy relationship is super important. And I don't have like a perfect way to implement it or anything, or like a perfect list of what is good masculine versus bad masculine. But I think that it's something that's been a little bit demonized by society. And I'd love to see that come back into the square again, to have a healthy conversation about what it means, so that men, because I think that a lot of men view this particular topic in a little bit of less of a dial of what it means to be masculine or less masculine, and more of an on-off switch, where it's like, okay, you've told me that I can't be masculine or that masculinity is bad, so I'm just going to flip it off. And by turning that off, now I am not ambitious. I am not a strong father figure to my kids. I am passive in the things that I do. I am not taking care of my body. I am not pursuing my career and an ability to appropriately balance, maximizing my ability to provide for my family, because I'm told that those aren't good things. And so I've become a passive person. And I think that it needs to be more like a dial, or even like a list of check boxes of things that aren't good, and moving those bad things out of the way and holding on to the good things. I don't think we've gotten to that level of nuance about this conversation. And it's something that I think should be brought back into the public square.
Yeah, I think, one of the challenges is, as you mentioned, like there is an extreme end to this. And I am by no means an expert. There's an extreme end to this that is like not a set of good traits that you should embody. And I think, people refer to that as like toxic masculinity or something. But there's a toxic version of this. And then there's what does it mean to be a man and a dad? And does that mean that you don't do certain things on the other end of the spectrum? Does that mean like you ignore your kids, you just plow yourself entirely into work? And I think you're saying like there is a role here to be able to do both of these things, to be able to like lead a family and be a strong father figure, but not like ignore your kids. Like you mentioned, not throw them in the back of the station wagon and don't talk to them for 5 years. Like you can kind of do both. Both of these things can be true. And I think this binary way that you've discussed that we've adopted is not great for anybody, because it also paints a picture of being a dad that is like not active in your kids' lives. And you can still be a great dad and a good, strong father figure and be active and a participant in your kids and be a good partner with your spouse and things like that. So,
well, I think part of that too is like the other end of that spectrum, or like, a portion of that, the nature of being binary in a way, is going too far into the feminine role of what it means to be a mother and the positive, strong traits that it means to be feminine and means to be a great mom. And I think a lot of men, come out of the masculine thing and then they lean over into those roles. And I don't think that that's a good thing either. Like the nature of how you have your relationship with your kids as a father is important. I don't think that it all needs to be like sunshines and birthday cakes and praise all the time. Like that's not necessarily what effective fathers do either. I mean, there's this balance between like, yeah, like my children respect me, but they're my friends, and I think that a lot of society has gotten like leaned into this thing where it's like, well, my children need to like me. And if they don't like me, then I'm not a good father. I'm not a good mother. I think especially for the father, that enforcement factor is one of the most effective and important things that you do as a father, is the ability to identify what good boundaries and rules are for your children with your spouse and being the ultimate enforcement layer, because kids need that. Kids that don't have that enforcement layer, or that are just always, I hate to say the word coddled, but are always kind of given what they want. And there's all the barriers are removed out of their life. And, you're a bulldozer parent or a helicopter parent or whatever. Like that's not effective fatherhood. You need to let your kids work through things. You need to give them constraints, whether it's a curfew at night or turning off their freaking iPad or whatever. That is your job, to enforce those things and make sure that your children are growing up in an environment where there are constraints and there are consequences. You can have a great relationship with your kids and still be the enforcer. And so I think there's just a bunch of things like that where it's like a lot of kids are missing that in their life. And I think that they are suffering from it as adults, as young adults, when they go out on their own, because they never had that thing. And I think society needs it, frankly.
yeah, it's really interesting. That somewhat relates to something another guest I had on the show talked about, which is like kids have to be able to make some independent decisions with guardrails and experience consequences in order to learn. And like that's a thing that you set as the dad in a partnership with your spouse, obviously. The other thing I wanted to talk about is you mentioned this like importance of having this really good collaboration and partnership with your wife. And then you also talked about prioritizing career and prioritizing family. But I think you also have this idea that there's like a third thing that you need to focus on, which is like you need to find something outside of work and family that you're passionate about. And this is not just you, dad. This is husbands and wives, like both partners in a relationship. And so I'm curious, like a couple of things on this one, like what is that thing for you? And then how have you brought that into your life as a dad and into your family?
So just off the top, I think this is extraordinarily important. It's important for you as an individual. It's important for your marriage. And by reflection, it's important for your family. A silly notion that's out there is like, you hit a midlife crisis and men will end up doing like one of four things. You'll end up doing endurance sports, smoking meat, sports cars, or whatever, right? Like there's like a few things that are in there. And while we laugh at it, there's a reason that those things come into your life. It's really for balance, right? Like if you spend your whole life and you maximize, let's just say that your goal is to optimize work and family, and you are just giving, you go to work and you're just pushing all day, every day, and you're giving to someone else. You come home and you're giving to your spouse and you're giving to your children. And then you go to bed and you get up the next day and you do it all over again. And 17, 18 hours a day, all of your time and energy is just pushed out towards others. It will inevitably lead you to burnout. It is not a sustainable strategy. You might be able to hang on longer than others. Maybe one person can do it for 18 months and you could do it for 5 years, but you're both going to hit a limit. And then when you hit that limit, the crash is not good. And that is ultimately what a midlife crisis is. Who am I? What am I really doing? Where am I getting my energy from? What's my meaning? Like, how do you do this stuff? So I'm an endurance athlete. That's what I got into. I was in my early 30s when I got invited to do my first triathlon. And now I've done, 8 Ironmans. I've done lots of bike races and cycling. And now I'm really focused on marathons and trying to maximize that, and I do everything between, 4 and 7 a.m. That's my thing. That's my me time. I get up early. I do that. And I force myself to be disciplined at night and go to bed at 9 or 9:30 because I need to get up and have that me time. And I have something else that I'm focused on. And it's extraordinarily effective. And for me, it's taking that, what would be like from the example earlier, maybe 18 months or 5 years of just pushing and grinding, and it will 4 or 5x that. If you find something that's really meaningful, it increases your capacity. Even though you're taking time away from the other ones to do this thing, it ultimately allows you to do the other two things far more effectively, with a better attitude, with more energy, and be able to sustain it for a far longer period of time than if you don't do it. And so whatever it is, go find it, right? And it's got to be balanced. Like I did a full Ironman about 5 years ago, and it required an incredible amount of time. I mean, like I was training like 25 or 30 hours a week for 9 months. Like it really took up a lot of my time, not to mention it's all kind of expensive. It was a great achievement, but I did that and I had full support from my wife. She's incredible. And she was very proud of me, but I was like, that's not sustainable. I can't do that all the time. I can go out and I can train for half marathons, and I can, put in a really good schedule to do a marathon once or twice a year. And I can do half Ironmans. That's very manageable. I found that that's a really important thing for me. And my wife has her stuff that she likes to do as well. And I support her in that. And we have this give and take where we both take the time to do that. And our marriage, I'll tell you this, I mean, it's been 10 years of me since I discovered that for myself. And I am nowhere close to burned out. During those 10 years, by the way, I've been an entrepreneur the whole time. So I'm building companies. I've raised 20 million plus in venture capital. I've encountered incredibly difficult things in my work life. And we have 5 children, which for most people is unfathomable. We're doing that as well. And our kids are in great places, and we're strong as a family, and we're doing nutty stuff like moving to Puerto Rico. And to me, a lot of that comes from the ability to balance myself. And then for me, on a personal level, my faith plays a huge role in that balance as well. And that's something my wife and I, in our family, we put in a fair amount of time into having that be a foundational layer as well. So I've just seen a lot of friends burn out trying to do it all and just focus on other people. And ultimately, you need to look yourself in the mirror and say, what do I need to? And find something that's meaningful, that gives you energy and lets you refresh on a very regular basis, because taking a 5-day vacation once a year isn't going to do it.
No. What's interesting too about the exercise thing, and I would say yours is like exercise exponential. Training for an Ironman or marathon is no joke. But like I've noticed, and I'm curious if you've noticed this too, that like so exercise has become a bigger and bigger part of my life too. And when I do it, I'm by myself, I get into kind of my own space. Like I tend to have more creative breakthroughs. I tend to think about things. I tend to go, oh, what if I did this professionally? Or what if we did this as a family or something? So it's like, it like fires these synapses where if I was not doing that, I don't think those same things would happen. It's something about like activating certain parts of my brain. And so I don't know if you found the same thing in those early hours when you're out there, like riding the bike or running, where your like brain is connecting things, or if you just completely zone out for multiple hours. But
no, I'm 1,000% the same way. I'm totally the same way. And friends and family think I'm crazy for not listening to music when I do that stuff. Like I'll go out for a 3-hour bike ride and I won't listen to music. I'll be by myself, or go out for a 2-hour run or whatever. It started because when you're doing an Ironman, they don't allow you to have music for safety reasons. And so you got to do the race without it anyways. So it's best to just train without the music so that you're not so shell shocked on race day. But then I got to a point where I just love it. I'll go out and I can do my thing. And I've learned that when I'm out there, I'll do just what you're saying. And your life runs through your head and it gives you a chance to reflect and really ponder on things. And I've had some of my best aha moments when I'm out doing that stuff. And I 100% agree. There's huge benefits besides just having some you time. It's great for the other areas of your life too.
Plus, it helps you be able to keep up with your eventual grandkids, so that's also good.
Yeah, that's right. I've got my 15-year-old daughter is running with me. She's training for her first marathon with me right now. She's done a couple of halves, and that girl's fast. And I'm like, my gosh, one day she's going to be faster than me. I'm like, yeah. And I'm just waiting for it. I'm just waiting for it.
What's dad like as a coach and training partner on these runs, or is she teaching you a thing or two now?
Oh no, I'm definitely her coach and her trainer. She is particularly a good subject. My boys that are closer to her age are not as receptive to coach dad. They don't like that relationship very much. When I know they would respect someone else with the basic things I ask, they don't like to do it. It's pulling teeth. It drives me nuts. But she's very, very good. We went through a variety of processes to figure out what her goal paces ought to be. And we designed out all of her training plan. And she hasn't missed a day in the last 14 weeks. I'm nursing a little bit of an injury right now, and I haven't been able to run for the last week. And she plans it herself. She goes out, she does her thing, and she reports back to me. It's freaking fantastic. She's an extraordinary individual. But yes, we get along pretty well on the coaching side.
Well, that's awesome. And kudos to your daughter at 15 for sticking with it and having that discipline. It's really impressive. So you have a couple frameworks or principles that I want to discuss. And that kind of builds on some other stuff that we're going to talk about a little bit later. But you've one as a parent and one as a spouse. And so I'm just going to sort of state both of these, and I'd love you to help me interpret them. The first one is, as a parent, you kind of hinted at this a little bit, be authoritative first, be a friend second. And then as a spouse, say what you mean what you say, and don't drop any hints, like no hint dropping. So let's start with the first one. Tell me about this idea of like authoritative first and friend second. This kind of connects back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the conversation.
Yeah, I think that, build on what we were talking about earlier. Your first job with your children is to not be friends. Now, that might be a likely outcome at some point by doing a good job of parenting, authoritative parenting. But if that's your first objective, you're almost assuredly going to mess up that relationship. I think that what you have to realize is that as an adult, your children do not know what is best for them in almost any circumstance. They do not have context. They do not have the life experience. They don't understand that eating cold cereal 3 times a day, every day, is going to be a very bad outcome for them, despite how much they love it. It's your job to provide appropriate guidance, boundaries, and rules that they probably do not understand why. And you do not necessarily have to get into the why, right? It's totally okay to be like, it's because I'm your father and I don't want you eating cold cereal 3 times a day. So go dump that down the sink. I don't care if we waste it. And you're going to save that for the dinner that your mom's working on today, or that I'm going to make later tonight, because that's better for you. That's the end of the discussion, right? And it's like, they might whine and complain and not understand, but I can guarantee you this: by the time they're 25, they're going to look back and they are going to understand. And that's the thing that I think you have to keep in mind, is that you do not have to have your kids understand everything that you ask of them and every rule that you put in place and everything else. And that's the authoritative side of it. You should respect your children. There's no doubt there. I'm not saying to disrespect your kids or to treat them as less than you or anything like that. But I think that as a parent, you need to look at them for what their greatest potential can be and how to help them achieve that. And the best way to do that is to provide them with firm guidance, firm rules, and allow them to build themselves up into their very best self as early as possible in their life. You can either raise your kids right and enjoy your grandkids, or you can be friends with your kids and then raise your grandkids, and that's sort of this thing where it's like, yeah, if you mess it up with your kids by just being nice all the time, there's a good chance that your grandkids come back to you to be raised, right? Because your kids have fundamentally not been able to function as adults. The flip side of that is, if you do a great job of helping them to achieve their potential and understand how to become an adult, you're going to be able to enjoy those grandkids, because your kids are going to be stable, functioning adults, and your relationship as adults are going to be totally different than they were when they were children.
Yeah. I love that. And I especially like what you said about being authoritative doesn't mean being disrespectful or not having respect for your kids or treating them as lesser. It just means they don't have the context and wisdom that you have as an adult. They need that guidance. They need to know what the boundaries are and what the rules are and why certain things, even though they might feel good to them, don't actually make sense, and that they'll appreciate it a decade into the future or something like that. So I really like that way of describing that, because I think some people might hear like, oh, you have to be authoritative, and they think like, oh, dad's just walking around like pounding on the table and yelling all the time. And that's not what you mean at all. So let's talk about the spouse one, which is say what you mean what you say, and no hint dropping. I like the no hint dropping thing. I have this like vision in my mind of what you mean by that, but like, tell me about that like principle or framework.
Yeah. So this is something that my wife and I learned after we've been married for about 2 years, I think. I think anyone that's been married knows that there are large differences between the communication styles of men and women. When you first get married, you find out those differences pretty fast, but you can't really, it's difficult to identify what's going on. You just know that it's not working, under whatever circumstance and whatever, like there's just moments where clearly you guys are just passing each other. And so this particular principle totally changed our marriage. We weren't having like a real rough go of it or anything our first couple of years. It's typical like early marriage. But when we learned this principle, it totally just clicked for both of us. We're like, oh my gosh, that's it. One of the principles that we learned as well that was really important and effective for us is that when you come into a marriage, you basically both come in with an invisible suitcase of things. I have my suitcase and my wife has her suitcase. And it's all the things that we grew up with, all the things that we consider normal or best or whatever, right? And included in that is communication styles and how you go about getting things done, and whether or not you're passive aggressive or you drop hints or whatever else. But if you cut right to the core of it, the very center of all of it is that if you just say what you mean when you should say it, right? And you mean what you say. So if you're going to say something, it needs to be taken at face value. You're not hiding things behind tone, and you find a respectful way to have conversations. And if you say that you're fine, that means you're fine. You're not waiting for the other person to ask you just the right question in order to tell you about the thing that's bothering you today, right? Or if there's a conflict in something that's going on, that you have a real conversation, you find a way to do it, right? So my wife and I have this thing where if we have something that we need to talk about, like a real conflict issue, then we give ourselves some breathing room. And I will say, honey, I have something we need to talk about. Can we talk about it after the kids go to bed? Now my wife's got 5 hours, maybe to worry about it a little bit, but she's also going into that conversation well prepared to receive whatever it is that I feel like I need to talk about, that we need to take the time to do it. And then we're both taking it really seriously. We both go into it with respect, with patience, where if I went to my wife and I just said something, she's caught off guard, automatically human nature, she's going to put up her guardrails. She's going to defend herself. And now you're not being productive, right? And then like in a totally different scenario, just day-to-day stuff, like hit dropping, what example from this class that we went through is really funny. This guy was talking about the relationship he observed in his parents. His dad would be watching television or something, and his mom would walk into the room. She would like physically be like, do you smell that? And his dad would be like, I don't smell anything. And she would do it again. You don't smell that? And then he was like, no, honey, I don't smell anything at all. And then she'd storm off. Turns out she wanted him to take the garbage out. Oh. And she could smell it in the kitchen. And she was hint dropping to him that like, well, duh, the only thing that would stink in this house is if the garbage wasn't out. Go out and take out the stupid garbage. And that was like just like an example of dysfunction in the way they try to communicate. Whereas if she had just walked in and been like, honey, I know you're watching TV right now. Sometime in the next 20 or 30 minutes, could you take a second in a commercial break and go take out that garbage for me? It's really starting to stink the kitchen. What would he have said? He would have been like, yeah, that's fine. Absolutely happy to do that for you. Love you. And so like when we figured out how to do that, it changed the nature of how we engaged with each other. And we've been married we're going to hit 20 years this year. And seriously, like that principle by itself has done more for our marriage than just about anything else.
Awesome. Love that. I'm a big believer in this concept of no hint dropping. Just say the thing. I also like what you talked about of like sort of setting up, in your case, hey, honey, I need to have a conversation with you a little bit later about something important. You're like priming the pump in that way. You're kind of like the, animal brain reaction that comes when you get surprised by something maybe is lessened by the idea that like, hey, we need to have a conversation about a serious topic or something like that. So I like that.
That's right. By the way, works for your kids too.
Yes, I was just going to say that's actually, I learned that in something around parenting, which is like, seeking permission is one way to think about it, but like, hey, are you okay to have a conversation about something right now? So you're like breaking down that initial barrier and reaction. In your case, it's like, hey, we need to have the conversation a little bit later.
Yeah, matter of fact, let me share one example, like one thing that I've done with my kids that is very meaningful to me. It's on that same topic, but I did it in a unique way. And maybe this will help somebody. But kids, when they've done something wrong, they have a really hard time fessing up or like having the conversation with mom and dad, right? It's very intimidating for a young person, whether they're 17 or they're 7, to approach mom and dad that they've broken something or they broke some rule, they got in trouble or, like got a bad grade, whatever. What I did with my kids, when they turn 12, we do either a dad, son or a mom, daughter trip. And they pick somewhere in the US and we go there together and we spend 4 or 5 days together. It's just good one-on-one bonding time, gets them away from the competition of the rest of the siblings, whatever. And in that trip, what we do is we find something, an object that was meaningful from that trip. So like I took my oldest son to New York, and we were in the Empire State Building and they were selling these Empire State Building baseballs. So you can't really play baseball with it, but it's cool. It's obviously his, it's a memory of that trip. It's whatever. I gave that to him and I said, this is I need to talk about something with you, Dad, object. And if you need to talk about something, you can take that, you can put it under my pillow anytime you want. And I'll know that when you do that you have something hard to talk about with me. And I will take some time and then I will tell you when I'm ready to have the conversation. And then I am the one going into that conversation with my child, level-headed, not going to freak out, with a pre-promise that I am willing to listen and understand everything and that we will work it out together, whatever it is. And that has been just awesome for my kids. They've taken advantage of it just a couple of times, but I think the thing that's more impactful about, the nature of my authoritative relationship with my children is that I am quasi-promising to take any of that mean dad, authoritative, rule enforcer dad, freak out, strong dad stuff. I'm going to put it on the shelf for a minute. And if you ever need to talk to me, we're going to have a real problem solving moment together, right? I think that has also set a really good tone in the nature of our relationship, that there's this other side to dad that they can tap into if they need to.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's really interesting. I have not heard anyone talk about it in that way before, but I love the idea of having this kind of like token or object or something that is like a signal. It's like putting up the flag on the mailbox. It's like something is happening here. And it's really funny. It is true. It's hard for kids. Like kids know most times that they've done something wrong. They don't necessarily need you to tell them once they get to a certain level of maturity. And so they honestly probably beat themselves more up than even ahead of that conversation, and they feel it. And so the idea that it's just like, hey, I'm coming to you. I put this thing in there. I know I messed up. I'm signaling to you that I want to talk about it. And, you can then have a adult conversation or a more mature conversation about it in a level-headed way is great. So thanks for sharing that. I'm glad you told that story. So I want to come all the way back to our AI and education topic as we start to wrap up this conversation. Clearly, you've started to embrace AI learning with your kids. And I think one of the challenges that I've experienced is, in most sort of traditional educational settings, we've been really wringing our hands about like, ooh, how do we use this? What's going to happen? And I think you've seen that it's actually pretty good to embrace it, or at least in your experience. So I'm curious, like, if you could talk a little bit more about this kind of like AI education that you're working on with your kids.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let me provide just a little bit more context on how I view the world. I felt that there's been a deficiency in our education systems generally, both secondary and higher education, for a couple of decades. Something is shifting in the world. We're doing education and teaching the same way we did 100 years ago. Very, very little has changed, right? Where, effectively all the information is locked up in these very specific places on a university campus, in a library, or in the heads of the professors or teachers that are giving you the information. There wasn't really another good way to absorb it. Like maybe you could go and buy a textbook and eke your way through it, but that, That's very difficult to do. There's no explanation, there's no engagement. And so really the best way to learn is to have someone that lectures you and taps into the knowledge that's out there and gives you a piece of how they see the world. And so with AI, it changes everything because it takes all of that information that's locked up and puts it out there in a way that you can actually engage with it. Maybe, sounds like stating the obvious, but you can actually dive into it and have it interpreted and provided to you. And the interpreted part is the hard part, but it can be maybe consolidated and provided to you if you do it right in a pretty unbiased way. And depending on how you go about it, you can get multiple perspectives on the same thing and make you even smarter than you might get a single perspective from a single professor. The thing about it is the way that AI works today is that when you look at education and AI from the traditional education standpoint to the way that AI is served up to us today, the education system basically looks at AI and says, using AI to do this education stuff is cheating. Therefore, we have to put up blockades and rules and ways to catch you cheating so that you don't use AI because that's not real learning. That's not real education. And we have to stop it. And from that perspective, it's true. To try to use AI in the workflows and the systems that currently work for education, whether you're a third grader or you're in graduate school, it kind of is a cheat. There's not a good way to leverage AI to go through the milestones and markers that they want you to. And so my opinion is that education needs to be totally restructured so that you engage with data and information in a way that allows you to learn and think critically, but also teaches you how to tap into every ounce of knowledge that the human race has ever accumulated, which is far more powerful than limiting it to whatever professor's opinion and interpretation of whatever topic is being provided to you. And that's the only thing that you get. But that system doesn't work inside the current system. And so if I were going to be a professor today, here's how I would set it up. I would say, hey, here's the syllabus for the semester. It's the topic we're covering on all of these dates. You have to come into class having already studied this, not from a textbook, but by engaging in your AI of choice. And here are my guidelines for how to do that. And so they take, like whatever, the event that happened, crossing the Delaware with George Washington, right? You got to study all this stuff about it. And so you've got to do that before you ever get to class. And when you come in, there's going to be a comprehensive quiz that tests your assessment and knowledge of these general things, not because of the things that I told you, but because of what you dug out of the system. And then we're going to spend the time as a lecture, not me telling you the information for the first time, but now all of us are going to engage together with all of the various perspectives everybody just got about that. And we're going to pick this sucker apart and we're going to think critically about it and all the things that are right and wrong and this perspective and that perspective. And that is going to be the end state. And then maybe there's still a test at the end or whatever, but it's going to be more about you regurgitating your ability to do it. And you're probably going to write something in real time while we're sitting in a classroom together, right? Because then I know you didn't do it with AI, right? Or whatever. So that's how I would approach providing education by leveraging AI, because you're putting the learning, the onus of the learning on the individual rather than the onus of teaching on the instructor to communicate the information. Anyways, all that aside, when we moved to Puerto Rico, we needed to have some sort of remote learning system anyways. And I was looking at stuff for the little kids, and that's great. The older kids, it was harder. My oldest, that was a senior, was basically done anyways, but I have a sophomore and what would have been an eighth grader in this weird place. And I was like, man, like remote learning in high school, that's got to suck. Like all these systems are terrible and they're expensive and you got to watch an hour of videos. Like you got to watch an hour of video for this class and you got 4 classes a day. And then you got an hour and a half of homework for everyone. I'm like, you're going to be working for 12 hours a day just to do this remote learning. I mean, this is garbage. This is terrible. That, or it was like totally unstructured and all of the onus was on the parents to be the teacher. And I was like, there's got to be something better than this. And so I ended up designing our own curriculum, which is sort of similar to what I described earlier, but on a macro case for their entire high school experience. So we identified, I worked inside AI to identify all the major, I guess, topical areas or subjects that they need to cover throughout school. I asked it to outline all of the subtopic areas that they would cover over the course of 4 years inside all of those, from history to mathematics and civics and whatever else, and put it into a schedule. And then every day, my kids know that they're doing these 2 or 3 classes on Monday, Wednesday. They're doing these 2 or 3 classes on Tuesday, Thursday. And they're doing this topic specifically in that course today. And I've taught them how to go into AI. And we've basically structured a conversation with AI around US history. We've done all these prompts to frame the AI's point of reference and how we want it to look at it. And then they just go in the next day and they say, hey, okay, we're going to pick up the schedule. This is the next big topic. Give me an overview in 1,000 words. And it gives an overview. And then I've taught my kids how to pick up the things that they think are really interesting and dive deeper into it. I've taught them how to think critically and to say, hey, this doesn't make sense to me. Give me another perspective on this event. And it does all those things. And so I'm teaching them how to engage. And it's been really, really interesting. It's not an official system, but coming out of like the whole like homeschool standard, you can actually do an awful lot with it. So I'm a big believer in what education can become if we allow the system to evolve. But the power of having all of the world's information and education served up on a silver platter for us is not going to fit in the way the education system has worked for the last 100 years. It's got to be restructured. So that's kind of a long answer, but
no, that was amazing. I'm sure there's some opportunities for optimization of that, which we won't explore in this conversation. But I think what's really interesting is like kids have an innate curiosity. Like if they wanted to spend 10 hours on this, they could just keep asking questions and keep going deeper. And it becomes this like fully interactive experience that being lectured at or having to just read a textbook and then like not being able to get more information when you want it or something like that is it's very limiting. And so this kind of like untethers kids and really like raises the ceiling on how deep they can go, where they can explore it, perspectives, like things like that. I think what's also important there is that you talked about like teaching kids how to think critically about that, because there are risks with where is it pulling its information from and how much of this is factually true. But like if you're teaching kids inherently to be on guard for that and to know how to interrogate it and to keep going, like it's actually quite better for them in the long term.
Because you think about the opposite of that when you're in a classroom, it's basically a game. And the game is provide the answer to the professor or teacher in the way that they think it's the right answer. And for most subjects, it's fairly subjective. The game becomes, I am learning what you want me to tell you. And what is that? That's worse than getting a bad answer from AI, because now I'm taught that is gospel truth. But if I took that topic or that question and I asked 10 different history professors, I'm probably going to get 10 different answers, right? So which one of them is really right? The teaching class today would say, well, of course I'm right. I am a professor. I have a doctorate in this thing, and you will tell me what I think is right. But if you put 10 of them in the same room, they all argue with each other. All of a sudden, well, it becomes pretty clear, like, well, who's freaking right? There's some things that are irrefutable, but most topics and most things have a lot of leeway. We don't get that benefit when you're being taught by a single professor from a single perspective, and they have to grade you and actually say whether you are right or wrong. That's the way that the system is built today. And the more that you start to pick it apart, the more you're like, man, this system kind of sucks. And there's a better way. Like we can all be so much smarter and so much more critical in the way that we understand the world, but we're put in this box. Anyways, there's a whole philosophical thing behind it for me.
All right. I love it. Before we end, we're coming up on time here. I wanted to ask you one more question. And that is, across 5 kids in 17 years of doing this dad thing, what is the most surprising learning that you've had as a dad?
Most surprising learning? I'll share 2 things. The first one, it might sound like a cop-out and it might sound obvious, but it's how fast it all goes. I cannot even tell you how baffled I am that I have a 17-year-old who's about to graduate from high school. He was born like yesterday. And I know everybody says that. It's, oh, you don't know how fast it's going to go, like whatever. But seriously, standing on the tail end of this, in 5 years, I'm only going to have 2 kids at home out of 5. 5 years ago was like nothing. While people have told me that my whole life, I don't think that I fully absorbed it until pretty recently. Within that, the lesson is like, my gosh, don't screw around. Have the experiences. Give your kids the things that they ought to have. Start when they're younger than you think that they ought to be, or to benefit from whatever thing. Give them those opportunities. Sacrifice to provide your kids with the things that you didn't have, or the things that you did have, and make sure that they get them too, because it will pass you by so fast. Let me give you one example. I had a project that I thought up about 5 or 6 years ago. I was going to come up with 100 topics that I wanted to have one-on-one conversations with my oldest son on. And I thought that I would modify it and I would do it with my daughter and my next son, et cetera. And that this was going to be my thing. that these were meaningful things, that I wanted to be deliberate. I just want to like go out for ice cream and we're going to talk about this topic for an hour. And I'm going to do one a month until he graduates from high school. Guess what I never did?
Any of those conversations?
Well, I mean, like I've had them just one off, but I never structured it. I never built the thing. And I was so inspired to do it. I still remember, like, this was a few years ago. All of a sudden, instead of being 11, he was 13. And I thought, oh my gosh, I haven't done the thing yet. I can catch up. And I was like, I just have to do twice a month for the next year and a half, and then I'll be caught up and then it'll be fine. And then life happened and I didn't do it. And then all of a sudden, he only had 2 years of high school left. And I was like, it's not even possible for me to do this now. And if I don't do it for him, how can I do it for my daughter? That seems unfair that I shafted him, you know? And I talked myself out of this thing, and all of a sudden now he's gone. He's going to be gone in 3 months. It happens so fast. So when you get those moments of inspiration, when you think you ought to do that thing, my gosh, don't put it off. Life just comes at you so fast. So that's one thing. I think that maybe the second thing is how important it is to customize what you're doing for each of your kids and figuring out how to do that for you. So whether you've got, I mean, like perhaps you have one child and that makes it much more straightforward. But if you have 2 kids or 3 kids or whatever, each one of them just learns so incredibly differently. And not just learning, but also the way that they learn through discipline and enforcement. And the way that you set up your system and the way that you set those expectations and engage with each child, you will get so much more out of them if you identify those differences and then adapt to them. The trick inside of that is how you do that without upsetting the other children, because inherently you're going to be doing the system a little bit differently with each of them. And you have to be able to understand how to have that conversation with each of those kids, get to them in a way that they will understand and learn and accelerate in their life the best. And that was much more of a thing than I think I originally thought it was going to be. And so I don't have like a magic trick in there, only just knowing that if you acknowledge it, you will do it better than if you try to have a blanket system that you just implement and try to keep the same.
All right. Well, those are 2 great ideas and learnings to end on, and amazing advice. And you've got a lot of perspective having had 5 kids. So to end, how can people follow along or be helpful to you?
Yeah, you know, I'm probably weird, but I'm kind of a LinkedIn guy. I post a lot of stuff about being a dad, about, you know, growing a company, and then, you know, sparkle in some economics and some other stuff on LinkedIn. But I have a pretty raw take in my whole LinkedIn experience. So you can come find me on there. I love having a follow, and I've been doing it for 7 or 8 years now. So it's a pretty good system. So if you want to follow along, that's the best place to find me.
Okay, cool. We will link to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes. Do you have a couple of minutes for our lightning round? I know we're a little bit over time.
Yeah, I'm good. Let's do it.
Okay, awesome. We will be fast. That's the notion of lightning round. So here we go. What is the most indispensable parenting product that you've ever purchased?
A ball popper. Little ball popper. The ball comes up, it floats in the air. The kid can take it and then put it back in, and it just goes in this eternal loop. Incredible for toddlers and small kids that are like, you know, 6 months to 18 to 24 months. The eternal toy. I will buy that for every couple ever. It is incredible. Incredible.
Wow. I've never heard of that before. That's amazing. I learned something new today. All right. On the flip side, what's the most useless parenting product you've ever purchased?
I don't know. We were so poor when we first got married. We didn't buy a bunch of useless stuff because we couldn't afford it. I don't know. There's got to be something in there. Shoot, I can't think of anything. Sorry, that's a terrible answer.
That's okay. Maybe that's the lesson there. If you can't afford to buy stuff, you won't come across useless products. So,
how about this? Most useless thing, anything that has music associated with it, just throw it in the garbage. Anything.
Yes.
Whoever designs toys and puts music in it should be shot. That's all I got to say. It's the worst.
Okay. True or false, there's only one correct way to load the dishwasher.
I must say that is very false, or I will end up in trouble with my wife.
All right. What would you say is your signature dad's superpower?
Good conversation with my kids.
Okay.
You know, I'm the enforcer, but I love to just sit down and like chat with my kids. And I think that does something special in our relationship.
All right. What is the crazier block of time in your house? 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. or 6 p.m. to 8 p.m.?
Yeah, I mean, like there's a lot of stuff going on in the mornings, but we're generally pretty organized and stuff just kind of happens. Nighttime is chaotic because there's stuff the kids are doing. You got to cook meals. People are coming home from work. I got late meetings. little kids got to go to bed. The older kids are staying up and going out with friends and need a ride. I mean, it's always chaotic from 6 to 8.
Yeah. Everybody sort of scatters in different directions. Yeah. If your kids had to describe you in one word, what would it be?
Probably funny. I think
Okay.
that's probably what my kids would say.
All right. What is your
Or
go-to?
goofy.
Oh, Goofy's another one. Goofy's it's slightly modifier on funny. So, what is your go-to dad wardrobe?
Oh, shorts and a plain white T-shirt.
Okay. What is the most absurd thing that any one of your kids has ever asked you to buy for them?
Absurd is probably relative. I had my son try to convince me to buy him a fully customized, see-through, LED lit up computer tower once. And he was like 13. And I was like, no, you are absolutely not going to have one of those. But good story. He ended up coming back to me later asking if he could build it.
Oh.
And I said, that's actually really good. So as a senior in high school, he's actually doing it right now. And he's going through a whole process of building out his own tower. That's worthwhile. That's worthwhile.
Cool. There's a learning outcome there. I love that. What is your favorite kids movie?
We'll go with Emperor's New Groove.
Oh, yeah. That's a good one. Okay. And then did you have a nostalgic movie that you just couldn't wait to force your kids to watch when they got old enough?
Well, I think they're just coming into age to be old enough, but Dumb and Dumber. And my wife would hate that I say that, but it is one of my all-time favorites. I just got to wait for my kids to get a little older before I pollute their minds.
Okay. All right. And then finally, with 5 kids, I'm very curious. What's your take on minivans?
Minivans are incredible and entirely functional. We had a minivan for 8 years, and then we moved to Colorado, and we were spending a lot of time in the mountains, so we upgraded to an Expedition to have 4-wheel drive in the mountains and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But minivans are incredible. I mean, seriously, we might go back to a minivan when all the kids leave. So
Awesome. Team minivan. I love that. All right. Well, Jesse, thank you so much for joining me today. This was a fantastic conversation, and I wish you and your family all the best for the rest of this year and beyond. And thanks again. This was great.
yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity to share.
Thank you for listening to today's conversation with Jesse Randall. You can subscribe and watch the show on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Visit www.startupdadpod.com to learn more and browse past episodes. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.